All right, welcome back. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am a general partner and co-founder of 8-Bit Capital, and I have this podcast, and you listen to it, and you listen to it more and more every week, which I appreciate, although I've told you, just to keep this our little secret, the guest today you're going to love. He's David Bohnett, and David Bohnett founded GeoCities. If you don't know what that is, look it up. But he sold it for billions of dollars, and that wouldn't be that interesting a story in today's day and age, which is incredible that I'm saying that, but I am. But he, a long time ago, founded GeoCities when the internet was not cool, or more precisely, it was cool to a very small group of people who saw its potential, but it wasn't the obvious thing it is now. But he had a vision, and he built this thing, GeoCities, which was a way for people to come together online. It's just this incredible thing that he sold for billions of dollars. That is a great story in and of itself, but then he does not go on to become a rich guy. He goes on to become a philanthropist, and he gives money to things like the LA County Museum of Art, where he eventually sits on the board, and that's an incredible institution. But he also gives money to things, now this isn't today, mind you, this is a while ago and through the years, gives money to things like social justice, LGBTQ issues. I don't know if these sound familiar to you today, but you get the idea. He's been doing it for a while. He's a great guy. You're going to love it. This is the Something Venture podcast. David Bohnett, the guest. Welcome back. All right, welcome back. This is the Something Venture podcast. I am Ken Lindstrom. I'm your host. My guest today is David Bohnett. How are you doing?
Kent, I'm great. Thank you. And congratulations on the success of your podcast. It's fascinating.
I appreciate that. You know, I started, I did radio at Northwestern, and, you know, all those years had sort of, you know, kind of forgotten about it. And then podcasting came along. I said, hey, I know what that medium is. You know, David, among other things, is the founder of GeoCities, which some people call the first social network. You know, whether you call it that or not, it was the first time writ large, as I recall, that people were uploading user-generated content, which these years later, you know, has become simply the way of the world. Before GeoCities, it was not simply the way of the world. Is the founder and chairman of the David Bohnett Foundation. I was going to try to list your civic engagements, and it's just too numerous, from the symphony, the LACMA, the LA County Museum. I'm a member of that museum, by the way, the LA
Great.
County Museum of Art, and I live in San Francisco.
Great.
That is the coolest institution. So how are things going in LA? How are what's kind of happened with these different civic endeavors as COVID has sort of come along? I'm curious what's happened.
There's you know, every organization, whether it's for profit or a not for profit philanthropic organization, social service organization, is affected, and some are affected more seriously than others. Some have the opportunity to take advantage of some of the aspects of the pandemic, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And some others are very, very seriously negatively affected. The performing arts organizations, Kent, I think, are among the most hard hit. You take away the healthcare professionals and the healthcare industry.
Sure.
The performing arts organizations have really struggled during this epidemic, primarily because of the difficulty, if not impossibility, of gathering in any size of a group. Most of these organizations have adapted to some form of online performances. There's a lot of that out there now. Some have done it better than others. But they've all had to drastically cut back on staff, and of course cut back, if not shut down, programming entirely. And there's a number of smaller organizations that just won't survive. So it's a difficult time for those groups in particular. There are others, such as social service organizations, that are seeing an even greater need for services beyond the enormous need that they saw before. And of course, as we all know and all recognize, that the epidemic only highlights the economic injustice and the economic inequalities in our country. So those organizations are serving the front lines as well as the healthcare workers.
Yeah, the performing arts it's just hard. I went to thinking about this. I went to a performance of Hamilton here in San Francisco, and it was like March 6th or something like that.
Right.
And people were just starting. A few people were wearing masks, maybe, and then I think it was something like a March 10th or I don't know what, that California had the stay-at-home order, and I was like, what? Did I just see one of the last performances of of something ever? It's heartbreaking for the shoulder to shoulder kind of live performance stuff. I mean, I can't symphonies, and I can see the art museums coming back a little bit, but some things like the symphonies, I just can't imagine what they do.
Some of these other organizations can't have, as well as many businesses have taken advantage in a good way of people's availability during the pandemic. We're all sitting in front of our computers. We're all really unable to travel, and so you do find pockets of organizations where they've actually expanded their audience and their reach because of the opportunity for building panels, in particular, building seminars and talks for folks around various subject areas that would be much more difficult to do in normal times. And so these are some of the behaviors that will carry through post-epidemic. We're all wondering, how often do we get in front of our computer screens? How often do we go back in person to things? And it's certainly going to be a hybrid. But there are organizations that have taken advantage of some of the characteristics. One of the other major institutions that I'm involved with, which has been very, very challenged, is University of Southern California. Not only USC, of course, but all schools, no matter at what level, have been affected by this. And USC, given the breadth of its education and professional programs, has been very, very hard hit. But all classes were migrated to online. We're doing online again this spring. There is a hope. And speaking of seminars, I attended an online seminar yesterday of professionals talking about the vaccine and vaccine availability, delivery, prioritization of who will get vaccines. And I am now hearing more specific and encouraging information. And this was a panel of health experts at USC. I'm now hearing more positive, encouraging information that the vaccines will be widely available by early to mid-spring. So there's hope, and there's brighter days ahead.
It's the vaccine news has been, I mean, in the mix of the news, I don't know if we've kind of ignored it, or it's kind of stunning news. I mean, in a matter of months, multiple companies have vaccines. In a world where vaccine used to take 10 years and maybe it was 50 to 60% effective, 3 or 4 organizations come out with 90% effective vaccines. It's kind of an astonishing, putting aside of course the tragedy of COVID, it's really an astonishing scientific accomplishment.
It's unprecedented in terms of the speed of which these vaccines have been developed. It's very important to emphasize that these vaccines have gone through the same safety trials and the same oversight, scientific oversight, that other vaccines have gone through. And even though those vaccines took longer to come to market, but we have a public health education opportunity and responsibility. And these vaccines have all gone through the standard trial period. Some are still in the trial period. Some are just coming out of the trial period. Their safety is as safe as other vaccines that are out there that we've all taken, like smallpox and measles, et cetera. The acceleration of the time frame has been due to the enormous amount of investment up front in ensuring that these vaccines can move through the process more quickly. So in the past, they took so much longer because investment was only committed when one phase was completed, and then the other, and then the other, and then the other. And at this point, all of the investment was made up front to ensure that the time frame would be accelerated. The third point is, there's a number of different types of vaccines, and so far they're all proving to be very effective. But that's very good news, that it's not just one vaccine, it's different types of vaccines. Some have to be refrigerated at very cool temperatures, some do not. So we will have a broader range to choose from than we would have otherwise. And there's more vaccine types coming out in the market. The very newest type is the RNA vaccine. It's very exciting to health professionals. It's the first time something like that's been done. So we really do have, it really has been remarkable, and there really are very encouraging signs.
What do you think will be permanently, I don't know if you've thought about that, and the vaccine's not here yet, but as you kind of look over the horizon, what do you think has permanently changed, either with, say, like higher education with USC or with the arts? I mean, will the symphony be back to, in the fall, we'll be going to see the guest conductor and shoulder to shoulder in a big auditorium, or is something permanently changed about these institutions?
We will all be back in theaters and concert halls and museums. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind about that. Will it be to the same capacity as soon as this fall? No, but we will be back, and at one point we will be back to the same level of capacity. I think fundamentally, and I'm an optimistic person, the thing that will be changed across the board is our level of gratitude, optimism, and awareness of how fortunate we will be able to be to gather together. So I think all these performances will have, I think, for the rest of our lives, an even more special significance. And I know that sounds, I don't know, it sounds, maybe it's just too positive, but it's true. And I've talked to people, I've talked to performers, and I have my own sense that we're coming through a very dark period, and it has always been the performing arts, music, theater, dance, that has uplifted us. I am on the board of the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C., and that is both the living memorial to President Kennedy and a performing arts center. On the walls of the Kennedy Center are inscribed various quotes by President Kennedy, such as, "Our commitment to the arts is who defines us as a society. Our commitment to beauty is what will be of lasting importance and endurance." So, perhaps with hope, we can return to some of those key principles so eloquently stated by President Kennedy, the importance of the arts in our society. And I think that will be one of the side benefits here.
Yeah. Wasn't it, I think, Winston Churchill, when they came to him during the war and said, "Hey, we can, save some money by cutting the arts," and he said, "Well, what the hell you think we're fighting for?"
Yeah, exactly. I didn't remember that. That's great. That's terrific.
But it's interesting you talk about the sort of the preciousness of performances now, because I went to, a few shows back in, I guess it would have been February, and I now really fondly remember them in a way that I wouldn't have otherwise, because I literally haven't walked into a symphony hall or a small concert venue, much less an art museum, in 6 months, and you really do miss it.
Sure. And the other thing, Kent, is our appreciation of the live performance experience, the shared live performance experience, even at the movies. And so, because we've all been so isolated, and we haven't been able to share these experiences in person, not just online, a very much renewed sense of appreciation, understanding of what a shared live performance means. And I think that's invigorating across the board.
Yeah, I think that's I haven't heard it phrased that way, but I do think the sort of, I will definitely be there till the third curtain call, this time,
Right.
and not be,
Right.
Rushing for the parking lot.
Right.
I wanted to ask you, you founded this seminal, technology company and eventually sold it. I wanted to get a sense. You actually grew up. I grew up in a little suburb of Chicago called Western Springs, which I think is right next to the town you grew up in, which is Hinsdale.
Correct. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that earlier. I've been thinking about that. And growing up in Western suburbs as we did, and fortunate, I assume you, like me, had the benefit of a very strong and good public education in Western Springs, just like I did in Hinsdale. And I then chose to, I didn't get into Northwestern Kent, so, good for you.
Thanks. And
My
Silicon Valley people are, look down on me because I didn't go to Harvard or Stanford. So I don't
so,
know.
but I did get into USC.
Right.
And one of the reasons I applied to USC was USC had an early computer science program. So I grew up in Chicago, but then moved to Los Angeles when I was 18 as a freshman at USC.
The thing I remember about Chicago, and I'll ask you more about GeoCities, but I was there as a kid, and then we moved to California, I guess, as a teenager. But there was a museum in Chicago called the Museum of Science and Industry. And at the time in the 70s, it must have been in the 70s when I went there as a kid, it was just the most, and in retrospect, I think the exhibits were probably, nothing like what you see today. But that place really left an imprint on me for some reason as a kid.
Well, you've teed this up beautifully. I mean, I've talked, I've talked quite a lot about how the Museum of Science and Industry was the catalyst for my passion and interest in information technology. We went on field trips to that museum, as you did, and I used to beg my parents and grandparents to take me to that museum, in particular to see the exhibit by the Bell Telephone Company.
Yes.
And all the current and future technology for the telecommunications system. And I can trace back from GeoCities and before how those visits to the museum were absolutely fundamental and critical inspiration for my future career.
It's interesting. I'm not sure if there's anything equivalent. California doesn't really have the same thing. We have the arts museums and all that, but we don't have that sort of industry technology museum in the same way. Perhaps.
Yeah, well, there's some very, you're up in northern. There's some very good science museum up in Northern California, but yeah, in terms of encyclopedic science museums, Museum of Science and Industry is top of the list.
This is an incredible spot. So the early interest in technology, this is before people have difficulty imagining when the internet wasn't a thing. Someone interested in what would be the internet today, at that time, it was telephones and ham radio, and those were kind of the communication devices at the time. I mean, as the internet emerged.
And those were the things that fascinated me the most. I was a ham radio operator. I learned Morse code. I remember my WB9 FTO, which was my call signal.
Yep.
And I was fortunate that I had a passion and intense curiosity for two aspects, both the underlying technology for these communication networks. How does the phone system work? How are the calls switched? What's the nature of the network? And then the sociological impact of the communication with others. So I remember as a ham radio operator, I would assemble my own ham radio kits, but then communicate with people all around the world and learn, where they lived and what their activities and cultures were like. So throughout my entire career, I've been very interested in both the science and technology side, as well as the human interaction and communication side.
And how did you become aware of I'm trying to remember this as it fades into history, become aware of the internet, of this concept? Because I remember using it for the first time in California. It was probably a Gopher or a Waze or some server like that. And I had this sense at the time of being astonished that I was on a computer in another place, which you never think about now. You send emails all over the world. Who the hell knows where your content's coming from? But at the time, I was very aware that I was sitting in San Diego giving commands to a computer in Minnesota. That was very profound to me, maybe in the same way that ham radio was when you were talking to somebody in Spain or whatever the case might have been.
Same thing for me. And I was fortunate that in high school, I learned basic computer programming language on a teletype time sharing terminal. So I took basic programming courses, and then you go to this chunk teletype terminal and you'd create a paper tape of the program, and it either ran or it didn't, and then you'd create another tape and it either ran or it didn't. And so, by the time I was 18, I had that same, experience, which is, I'm sitting at a teletype terminal connected to some larger computer in a time sharing basis far away. And then went off to college and did programming on mainframe computers. And then the PC came out eventually, which was amazing. And to me, just a transformational business tool when it first came out. You had word processing and you had spreadsheets and you had a printer, and you could do, especially with the spreadsheet programs, you could do a lot of things and a lot of analysis that would have been very time consuming prior to that. But then the big development after that was the introduction of the modem, and in particular, the introductory 300 baud modem from Hayes. And that then opened up the whole world, not just the static box that sits on the desk, but you connected it to a telephone line, and through a series of programs and loading a disk and dialing the phone and getting it connected to the phone, all of a sudden you're online. And you're online initially with these proprietary bulletin board systems that had, they had postings and job listings and just other ways of sharing with people in a very slow and very text-based way, but you're connected remotely in your own home through the telephone line. And then the online services came very shortly after that: AOL, Prodigy, and CompuServe. And those were their own versions of the internet, the online services, and you could chat, you could get theater listings, you could listen to music. So those online services then were the precursor to what then evolved for all of us into the internet and the World Wide Web. And so that was my own trajectory in terms of getting to the internet.
And when did it occur to you that you could actually build something? So now every college kid knows that if they choose to, they can go build something on the internet and somebody might buy it for $1 billion. But at that time, what made you think I could actually build did you think you were building a company, or were you building a community, or how did that begin?
My first, having been very active in these online services because I was so fascinated by them, CompuServe and AOL and Prodigy. And in 1994, I started to read about this thing called the World Wide Web, and I thought, oh my gosh, this seems so exciting. I mean, this could be a global AOL.
Right.
And none of us, who knew? But I thought, well, I really just have to be a part of this. I couldn't sleep. So I had a Windows computer and I had to install the 32-bit extensions. And in '94, and I installed an early Mosaic browser and got online. Oh my gosh, it was, seeing hypertext transfer, the hypertext transfer protocol, and seeing how one document could link to another was just, the potential, as we now learn, was enormous and almost infinite. So it was in 1994 that I first connected online to the web, and that was the beginning of my career on the internet.
And when did you realize that you could start, or how did you realize I can start a company? I'm going to create this thing called GeoCities where people will come online. Like, what was that moment?
What I first realized was that you could start a company, you could create websites. So I learned native HTML, and there were early ISPs, and you could actually, if you could write your own HTML, you could create your own website. So that's what I learned how to do first. And then the second thing that we learned how to do was to start hosting websites for others. Mm-hmm. So we would host early websites for other commercial ventures, including a few banks and otherwise. And so that was the start of the company, by hosting and creating very simple and very early days websites for others. But then I thought, this is this isn't really what I thought would be the thing I'd be most interested in was creating and hosting websites for others. I want to give that opportunity to everyone, every individual, to create their own website. And that was really the genesis for GeoCities, was ensuring that everyone who got on the internet had the tools and the opportunity to participate in the new medium. And they could participate in the new medium by sharing their knowledge and joining a community where they were among others with similar interests. So it was both ensuring that people could easily create their own personal websites, but ensuring that they had the tools to share their own interests and passions, no matter what they were, among others in a community of interest. So it was that framework of communities of interest that was the other thing that we brought to the table.
And people forget that at this time, you didn't just sign up, and not even close. You didn't just sign up for AWS and somebody ran your software. Everything was a physical, right? You had to get a drive and put in a disk and go to a place.
Well, you from our standpoint, we had to build not only the interfaces that the user saw, and I wrote all the native HTML interfaces initially for GeoCities, because you had to have different interfaces. Most people got online through the online services, so you had to have different interfaces tailored to those services. But all the backend, all the servers, all the disk storage, everything. Eventually, all the ad servers, all the billing, all the performance tracking, all the monitoring, everything we had to build from scratch. There were no tools.
Right.
You had to develop your own. It was these did not exist, and so we had rooms and rooms and full of servers and disk arrays, and it was a challenging time, but it was also just incredibly fun.
And as you put this out to the world, like, how did people, on day one, there's just a bunch of nothing at GeoCities. How did people first learn about it? Flyers on the street? Like, what was the?
We had, I had, is related to my passions of technology and communication. I remember the early days, Kent, when it was that same state of mind you talked about before, where I remember early web cameras, and they weren't even called web cameras, they were called webcams. And there were two that I remember from very early days. There was a fish cam in San Francisco, and there was the coffee pot cam.
I remember the cuff. Yes, that was the coffee pot camera. This was great.
And so I just thought, my friends, we just thought it was, what the hell? Who cares? What is this? A coffee pot in Cambridge, and it only refreshes every 30 seconds. And what's the big deal? And I thought it was the biggest deal ever, because it created this state of mind that you from anywhere, you could look at this coffee pot cam.
Yeah.
And you ask, why was there a coffee pot cam? Because the engineers on one floor didn't want to go down to the next floor, up to the next floor to see if there was any coffee. They rigged up this camera so they wouldn't have to walk up or down a floor to see if there's coffee in the coffee pot. So, but then anybody in the world could see it.
Right.
And I thought this has enormous potential, which is now developed into all the streaming and sharing that we do online. But so I had a fascination about that. And I had a friend that had a graphic design office at the corner of Hollywood and Vine. And I thought, I want to put a webcam in his office pointed at the corner of Hollywood and Vine. And so I had an old VCR camcorder that had an output jacks. And we bought a small SunSpark server and a small video card. And we soldered the output from the video cam to the Spark video card. And we bought this set. We got this separate ISD line hooked up in his office. And we pointed the webcam out at the corner of Hollywood and Vine. And it refreshed every 8 seconds. And that got a lot of attention in press and newsletters. And it was, tune in to Hollywood and Vine on the internet. And people would go and they'd hold up signs and they'd wave at their friends. And So we had that webcam, and then we had an office in Beverly Hills, and we had a webcam pointed on Beverly Hills on a bus bench on Wilshire Boulevard. And enough people were seeing those webcams that we were able to leverage that traffic once we started to offer our free homepages and free websites. So it was a small list that I mailed people, but it was also the popularity of these webcams. And then people figured out that they could set up their own websites. So that's how it happened.
And then how did it, from day one, did it start growing quickly, or did it take a while before it, because at some point it grew enormously?
It took a little while, but not as long as we didn't know, and not as long as we expected. It was just two of us at that point, me and my co-founder, John Resner, who was just brilliant in his ability to build and maintain and scale the infrastructure. And I remember I would get an email every time somebody registered, and I'd get this little ding on my email client, and I'd be sitting at my desk and I'd hear ding, and then a couple of minutes later, hear ding, and I thought, well, this is cool. People are registering, and then it was more frequent, and then it became I had to turn it off. Just
Right.
enormous distraction, and it was unbelievably exciting because people would then create their own website and send it to friends, and then other people would see that and they'd want to create their own website. So we were the third. We climbed up to be the third most trafficked site on the internet at some point, and we were registering something like 6 users a second, maybe more every minute of the day, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and the amount of content that people were uploading was astronomical.
And this was before they really had great mechanisms for uploading content.
No, it was difficult. It was, and we had to build, all the interfaces to do that. But let's get back to one of your very earlier comments, which was user-generated content. And one of the biggest battles I had, both with raising financing and really then ultimately going public, was establishing the validity and the credibility of user-generated content. And you might think, like, I don't even know what he's talking about. But I mean, if you really think back, that we only had top-down programming. We only had television, cable television, newspapers, radio. That all came to us through those publishing mediums. That's what people consumed. Sure, there were other smaller newsletters and things that people would create in your church bulletin, but I want to turn that whole model on its head. I want to say we are all about content that users create, not content that is created and programmed for us. And so it was a hard concept for a lot of people to grasp. And also, like, I remember hearing investors and others say, why would I want to look at, pages that other people created? Well, the answer is because they're interesting and they're fascinating, and these people are experts and passionate about their own field. But it was a big thing to establish, as I say, the credibility and the interest in user-generated content. But the numbers spoke for themselves. Tens and tens of millions of users creating content that other people are looking at is all the proof you really need.
And there's also the concept of the context too, where you're like, well, this isn't a very good picture of a baby, and you're like, well, yes, but it's my brother's baby, so I find it a very interesting picture.
Yeah, but interesting thing about that is there wasn't nearly as much of that as there was about pages about raising babies and pages about right. So people sure, they would post pictures of their family and things, but it was much more overwhelmingly subject matter based, and that's been one of the biggest surprises for me, is to see how communities and social networks have evolved to be so self-referential, because that's just not where we started. Yeah. We started with people who wanted to share their passion about dogs and airplanes and sports, and sure, people still do that, but it has turned into such a me-focused medium. And maybe that's just inevitable if I'm sorry, maybe that's just inevitable if you go back to the genesis of user-generated content, because it's the user that's generating the content.
Yeah, I talked to somebody who was early on in the video. Actually, podcasts do video as well, and he was at Apple early. And they thought that the big thing would be webisodes. Like
Yeah.
people would generate little web shows, and you'd watch episode after episode. And that's not what happened. It ended up being this kind of strange collection of sort of pranks and
Yeah.
it isn't that. It isn't people creating long form stuff. It's people creating these very specific videos where they try on clothes or they
Yeah.
something or what. It just different from what people thought.
Well, and we have come full circle, because now the internet is the medium for streaming programmed content. So,
Right.
we have both, but we also, I mean, it's a testament to the quality of the content that those who know what they're doing can produce. The quality of the writing, the acting, the direction, the production. So we all still really want that kind of content, but we want it how we want it. We want it when we want it, in the size we want it. And so I would say now we have the best of both.
Did anything go wrong along the way? I mean, from your initial. I mean, there was a time when people thought there wouldn't be, the internet wouldn't be commercial. Like people got mad when there were ads early on. Do you think what Facebook and what you've sort of kicked off has gone the right way, the wrong way, or just the way it is?
Well, this gets into a thornier series of topics, because I remember when we were creating our user guidelines, which I created and I continue to create. I wanted to create a culture and a company that respected uh, people's viewpoints and celebrated individual viewpoints, but did not tolerate racist behavior, did not tolerate hate speech, did not tolerate violence. And so we had to continue to evolve and develop our guidelines that were consistent with our culture and my sense of what a healthy, vibrant community would be. And then we had to develop the tools for our users. We had community liaisons and community leaders who would monitor pages to ensure that they were consistent with our guidelines. And our guidelines did not and would not allow much of the material that is on the social networks today, that has, I think, been so harmful and damaging. And we encouraged creative dialogue, we encouraged people's viewpoints, but we would not have allowed much of the misinformation and much of the racism and hostility that is on social networks today. So those guidelines and those cultures can be created and they can be enforced even without government regulation. And so it's a complete cop-out to say, well, we can't, there's nothing we can do about it. There's everything you can do about it, because we did it. And we did not have the kind of material that is on the social networks today that has been so damaging. So that's my opinion about where we've evolved. And I also think we've evolved to the point where some level of government oversight and regulation is imperative going forward.
Well, and maybe coming. So
Yeah.
as you, no, thanks for that. As you, so the company grows, it goes public, gets acquired, by Yahoo. You have the resources to kind of pursue a lot of things. You've supported, I think, GLAAD in Los Angeles and the arts and social issues. As you kind of look, at the paths those are taken, which things have sort of worked, and which things do we have a lot more work to do? Like as you've invested your time and your money into these different things.
The key, speaking of culture, the key themes and culture of the foundation is improving society through social activism. social justice and social activism. So part of my upbringing and part of my own passion is helping others and helping others achieve their full potential. I was fortunate to have, as I mentioned before, a good education, in a family that valued education and a family that valued work, and the positive benefits that come from work. So as a result of that, it's been my opportunity and good fortune and responsibility to give back in a way that helps lift up others and in underserved communities and elsewhere. So everything we do is all about, just like it was with the GeoCities, in some way or the other, empowering individuals and ensuring individuals have the opportunity to reach their full potential, no matter in what field or what that is. So one of those areas that you mentioned has been for over 20 plus years, lesbian and gay civil rights. And we worked very hard across the board for all sorts of gains in same-sex adoption, same-sex relationship recognition, including and leading up to marriage equality. But there's other areas we've continued to work on as well, with programs at universities that promote leadership development across the spectrum. We have programs at various graduate schools of public policy at the University of Michigan, University of California, Los Angeles, NYU, New York University, and at USC, at these graduate schools of public policy that provide scholarships and internships in the local mayor's office on critical social and economic justice public policy initiatives, whether it's transportation, whether it's homelessness, whether it's substance abuse or mental health. So that provides opportunities for these graduate students to get real world experience in their local communities. So we have a variety of programs all within sort of that common theme of social justice.
Well, let me, I'll wrap up a bit, but let me ask you what, as this pandemic hit, and I think really it's stunning, the sort of, how much certain people have benefited from it. I mean, the stock market raging along, people working at home, companies like Zoom creating billions of dollars in market cap, where I don't know what it is, 1 out of 5 people is food insecure at the same time. It feels like we've learned something that was probably true a year ago, but maybe we didn't know. Like, I didn't see lines of people waiting for food in San Francisco a year ago. Today, there is such a line, in my neighborhood. Did we learn? Did something new happen, or did we learn something that existed? And are we going to do any? Is there something to be done because we've learned something, or is this just a tragedy that we're watching unfold?
Again, I'm a hopeful and optimistic person. I think we've learned something. I've tried to inspire in others, that we've learned that everybody can help in some way. I think we've learned that it is through the act of giving that you actually give back. It is through the act of giving that you're giving to yourself at the same time. So helping a neighbor, helping an organization, supporting an organization is, I think, something that we have a much greater awareness of, and I hope that continues to carry through to where we maybe make a little bit more effort across the board for the rest of our lives to help take care of one another.
Well, on that optimistic note, let me, how do people, if they want to learn more about the foundation or anything you want them to learn about, where would you direct people?
Bohnett Foundation, BOHNETT Foundation.org. Kent, it's such a great opportunity for me to revisit that period of time and talk about sort of how we got to where we are today, and I really appreciate you reaching out to.
Well, I so appreciate you doing this. Thank you so much. My guest has been David Bohnett. This is the Something Venture podcast. I'll talk to you next time.